Welcome to Speaking Concretely, the official podcast of the Cement Association of Canada. I'm your host, Adam Auer, President and CEO of the CAC. Today's guest comes on at a genuinely pivotal moment. Just last month, Prime Minister Carney announced a new national electricity strategy committing to double the capacity of Canada's grid by 2050. It's a bold declaration, and it's landed in the middle of a very active national debate about what Canada's energy future actually looks like and who it's for. I'm pleased to be joined today by Nancy Wright, Vice President of Operations and Business Engagement at New Economy Canada. New Economy Canada is a nonpartisan alliance of business, Indigenous, and labour organizations committed to building Canada's clean economy, and the CAC is a proud founding member of the NEC. Nancy, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Adam, for having me.
Well, why don't we just start with explaining in a bit more detail what is New Economy Canada and what is meant by this term New Economy?
Well, as you just mentioned, New Economy Canada is an alliance of more than 70 businesses, labor organizations, and Indigenous partners. And together we represent over 485,000 workers across emerging and traditional sectors, so manufacturing, electricity, mining, construction. We have a number of clean tech companies, and together they generate over $200 billion in annual revenue. And the Cement Association of Canada and your 6 member companies are a key partner for us. And in a nutshell, we're working to grow investment in Canada's new clean economy. And when I say new clean economy, it's really a lot like the old economy. It's just powered with clean energy and built differently. So we still need roads, bridges, homes, factories, all that infrastructure that keeps Canada moving. And we'll still rely on the industries that have long driven Canada's prosperity, again, manufacturing, mining, transportation, construction, etc. But as global markets evolve and new pressures arise, tomorrow's economy will be powered more and more by clean electricity and built with lower carbon materials, cleaner manufacturing processes, and more efficient modern technologies. And that's really where the cement sector comes in. And the clean economy is really about modernizing Canada's industrial base and building more of what both Canada and the rest of the world will want in the coming decades. So the cement sector is a great example. Companies are investing in low carbon products and production methods that reduce emissions while improving efficiency and competitiveness. So similar transformations are underway across Canada's economy. But we can't just talk about the clean economy without talking about energy and specifically electricity. For many industries, the most important way to increase productivity, improve competitiveness, and reduce emissions is by switching from fossil fuels to clean electricity. And that's why electricity is increasingly becoming the backbone of our economy.
Great. Thanks so much for that background. And I am going to ask you some questions about the cement and concrete, of course, a little bit later. But I want to start with, probing a little bit about this notion of the clean economy, because I think most people would understand, when we use the term clean economy, that we're talking about, environmental benefits, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, for example. But one of the things that New Economy is trying to emphasize, and I think it's part and parcel with the title of New Economy as opposed to just clean economy, is that it's the business case that underlines this transition. So can you tell me a little bit more, tell the audience a little bit more about how a clean economy benefits businesses and the economy as a whole?
Oh, sure. And I think you said it best, Adam. So I'm going to quote you. You said modernization of our industry is effectively decarbonization. And this idea can be applied to many of our partner organizations and many, many sectors. So the most basic way to highlight the business case is from an efficiency angle. Electricity is a much more efficient source of power than using fossil fuels. So let's use cars as an example. Today's gasoline fuel cars, they lose about 80% of the energy that is pumped into their tanks to waste heat, and that can't be harnessed. Whereas EVs use 85% of the energy with only 10 to 15% energy loss by comparison. Well, that's just simply the thermodynamics from burning gasoline. A similar calculation can be applied to all sorts of technologies across all kinds of sectors. So This means that an electrified and clean economy can output the same amount as the fossil fuel-powered economy for a lower cost and higher productivity. The challenge, of course, is the upfront cost of purchasing any new technology, whether it's an electric vehicle or industrial electric equipment. There needs to be supports to help businesses and citizens get the equipment so they can start saving money on the energy costs. But that's an aside. Another important aspect related to the business case are global trends. The rest of the world is accelerating their transition to cleaner power and clean tech. We need to be doing the same to stay competitive in global markets. In 2025, I'll just give you an example. Global investment in the energy transition reached $3 trillion Canadian. That's double the investment in fossil fuels. 1 in 4 cars sold in 2025 were EVs, and solar is on track to becoming the leading source of power. In 2024, more than 90% of newly announced steelmaking capacity globally used electric arc furnace technology instead of coal. So it's happening. These kinds of shifts, along with countries increasing their demand for low-carbon products, signal where future prosperity will be found.
I like those stats because there is this kind of impression, I think, that's developing in North America that somehow we're retreating from this transition. But when you look outside of the particular sort of geopolitical moment that we're in North America at what's happening in the rest of the world, you can see, as you well illustrate in your stats, that the transition is still going strong and in fact accelerating around the world. And bringing it back to Canada, though, I mean, you talked a lot about efficiency and how this transition is in large part about using energy more efficiently, getting more out of the energy that we use by switching to different energy sources. But underlying this, of course, is a huge build out of infrastructure. We're talking about doubling the electricity supply in Canada. Can you give us some examples of some of the key projects that you see in this transition to a clean economy and the kind of opportunities that they offer?
Oh, for sure. I mean, to your point, Canada has a moment now to build critical infrastructure and major projects that protect and grow our economy. And of course, all of the economic output linked to these developments needs to be underpinned by building more electricity. We need to double the grid, and it's going to take a lot of big projects to generate the kind of electricity that we need. Then we need to move that electricity to where it needs to go. So some of the biggest infrastructure projects that can help unlock the clean economy are electricity transmission lines, both intraprovincial and interprovincial. So that's making connections between provinces and territories, because transmission lines enable regions to efficiently exchange electricity when one region has low demand or high supply. So wind and solar that could be generated in Alberta, for example, could be stored for BC's grid with its dams. Another example would be the North Coast Transmission Line, announced in BC. It's been referred to the Major Projects Office because of that massive potential for the region, primarily to power mining. So once operational, that line's expected to create nearly 10,000 jobs and contribute nearly $10 billion per year to GDP. Once that transmission line is enabled to the North Coast, it then powers critical mineral mines, minerals like copper, which you need for transformers, transmission lines, EV charging systems, solar panels, host of other applications, and nickel, for example, that is key for EV batteries and energy storage. So an industry example could be Newmont, who is one of our members. They're expanding their Red Chris mine in northern BC to increase Canada's copper production by 15%. But while doing so, they're actually reducing their GHG emissions by 70%. So to build out these projects and others at the scale and speed needed to reach the ambition that's been set out for us, that's a big challenge, and it's going to require people, literally thousands of skilled tradespeople. There's a statistic released by Electricity Human Resources Canada recently that estimates that all this could create up to 130,000 new jobs in Canada's electricity sector by 2050, and that's significant.
One of the things I like about the new Economy Canada model, and I would say it's one of the reasons that the CAC joined, was because, as you kind of outlined in your sort of introductory remarks to the first question, there's this commitment to showcasing not only new and emerging technologies that are shaping the new economy or economic future, but also how traditional industries like steel, cement, automotive, you mentioned mining just now, these remain foundational, even as they are also kind of modernizing to meet the demands of the energy transition. And, you mentioned a quote that I delivered to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development recently that talks about what that means in cement. Modernization, productivity improvements are also decarbonization improvements. And so now, this is sort of the opportunity for me to ask you, in the case studies that you've collected around both these sort of emerging and traditional industries at New Economy Canada, what role do you see for my sector, for cement and concrete, in the clean energy infrastructure that's coming?
Well, cement and concrete are absolutely foundational to the clean energy transition. In fact, one of the paradoxes of the clean economy is that many of the technologies we need to reduce emissions require a lot of concrete. When people think of energy and clean energy, they think about wind turbines, solar panels, EV charging stations, and the like. But what they don't always realize is that almost all of those rely heavily on cement and concrete. Every wind turbine sits on a massive concrete foundation. Hydroelectric systems are among the most concrete-intensive infrastructure projects ever built. BC's and Quebec's clean electricity advantage is literally built on concrete. So another one of our members, Invinity Energy Storage, they make large-scale batteries, and any large energy storage project like that needs a concrete pad to sit on, and that can carry that heavy load. So, we can't power sovereign AI without more electricity, and we can't build the data centers needed without your industry. Those facilities require significant concrete infrastructure. Where there's building, there's cement and concrete. So it's critical.
We like to say that we should be thinking about cement and concrete the same way that we think about energy, actually, that it's a critical input into the economy, without which almost any economic sector, can't run.
Indeed.
Yeah. And a matter of economic sovereignty, we would say. But let's shift to the political conversation. I still think that the elements of this transition are, being debated out in the open right now, including, the ways that governments should be incentivizing and encouraging this economic shift. What is your view, or New Economy Canada's view, on the role of the federal and provincial governments in encouraging the transition to the new economy?
It's really a critical role, Adam. And the most important thing governments can do is create the conditions for investment and deployment. Because business makes long-term investment decisions when they have confidence in the direction of the market. That means clear policy signals, reliable infrastructure, predictable regulations, and efficient permitting processes. So one of the biggest priorities right now is ensuring we have enough electricity to support growth. If you want more manufacturing and more industrial activity, more housing, a secure north, like all of these things, we need the electricity infrastructure to power it. We also need to realize that the clean economy isn't being built in a vacuum. Countries around the world are competing aggressively for investment in clean manufacturing, critical minerals, clean tech, those kinds of things. So the question it's not whether the transition is happening, to your point. It's, can Canada capture a meaningful share of those jobs, the investment, economic activity that come with it? So we need to continue supporting innovation and commercialization. The innovations and investments that our partners, like you guys and your members, are driving make the reality of the clean transition tangible for both political decision makers and the general public. So governments can help accelerate adoption by buying clean products and technologies, which means updating procurement practices. They need to ensure regulations allow innovative products to compete in the marketplace. They can offer tax credits to support companies shifting to cleaner technologies and use loans like they do with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. And then they've got, clean or buy Canadian policies so we can start buying our own Canadian innovative clean tech. So at the end of the day, the goal is not to force businesses to change. It's to create the conditions where cleaner technologies are the most competitive and attractive option. And when that happens, the market does much of the work itself.
Yeah, and I think we would say it's the opportunity to integrate multiple outcomes through those incentives as well. Like you say, if you're incentivizing clean energy infrastructure, for example, why not also take the opportunity to create the incentives to make sure that the concrete used in those projects is also benefiting from, incentives to modernize, increase productivity and decarbonize at the same time. I mean, maybe in that context, there's still, I would say, a lot of tension around some of the decisions that are being made right now around this energy transition, the role of natural gas, for example, whether the target is too ambitious or is it not ambitious enough? What are sort of the technology bets that are sort of implied in the policies that are being put forward? From the perspective of New Economy Canada, what would you say? Is there anything that you wish political decision makers understood about this transition that you don't see reflected in the conversation that's happening right now?
I would say the transition is accelerating globally, and if we don't keep up, we will be left behind, and our economy and prosperity risks floundering. The countries that most effectively adapt to the energy transition, they will see advantages. And despite having one of the cleanest grids in the world, we just can't afford to be complacent. We're entering the age of electricity. The best time to prepare was yesterday. The second best time is today.
I love that. I love that line. I'm thinking also about I think, in my opinion, long overdue conversation about, resiliency and preparedness and affordability and how they interrelate. We've seen, longer than anticipated war, in Ukraine, for example. Now we have the war in Iran, and the impacts of both of those conflicts on global energy supply, I think, has kind of finally spurred a conversation about energy resilience and preparedness and affordability. And we would see even resilience of other supply chains, like building material supply chains, for example. What would you say about how, the current uncertainty, what impact is it having on our understanding of Canada's resiliency and preparedness and the broader question of energy and infrastructure affordability?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a very timely question because it gets at the heart of the conversation a lot of Canadians are having right now. For years, the clean economy discussion has been framed primarily around emissions reduction. But things are changing. We're now seeing it being framed around economic resilience, affordability, energy security. To your point, a cleaner economy doesn't automatically guarantee those outcomes, but if done well, it does strengthen all three. So one of the biggest lessons from recent years is that Canada cannot take energy security or supply chains for granted. And you mentioned the Iran war. Well, the solar power deployed in Europe has saved the region over $20 billion from not having to import fossil fuels. And that's just since the start of that war. So I did the quick math. That's about $220 million every day. So if you think about that, that's a huge number. Cleaner economy, it improves resilience by diversifying our energy sources and reducing dependence on a single fuel or supply chain. So that gives countries and their communities more control over their own energy future. And when we change where our energy comes from, we also change who has influence over it. But, and this is a big one, the transition only succeeds if people can afford it. So building enough electricity will take $1 trillion investment, and we need to figure out how to do it while maintaining affordability for ratepayers. The economists and the investment bankers in our federal government are working very hard right now to figure that out. Good news is that most cleaner technology offers lower operating costs over time. And there's many examples of this. Electric vehicles lead to lower fuel and maintenance costs, energy efficient buildings reduce utility bills, industrial efficiency improvements, they lower operating expenses, and so on. But transitioning from the status quo of the last 100 years to a cleaner economy, it's an enormous challenge, and we can't take it lightly. It's a systems change, and systems change is messy. That's what makes this such a pivotal moment. If we delay or we don't fully buy in across the country, across levels of government, across political parties, then the benefits and potential of a clean economy can't and probably wouldn't be realized.
Well, that's a great transition to my final question, Nancy, because I think you've painted, on the one hand, a very optimistic picture of, how quickly the world is in many ways already transitioning to the new and cleaner economy and some of the exciting trends that are developing around the world. But I think you're also acknowledging, as you just said, this is, a systems change kind of transition. And so there are obviously huge challenges to be overcome to make sure that, that transition happens smoothly and to, the maximum benefit to the Canadian economy and to Canadians in general. So, crystal balling, I guess, is one of the things that we tend to do towards the end of the podcast as a bit of a tradition. So why don't we end things off with a look into the future? Where do you see, or where do you hope our clean economy will be in about 10 years from now?
Well, it won't be the clean economy anymore. It will simply be the economy. Clean electricity and renewable technologies will be the default choice because they're the most cost-effective and efficient options. Clean tech companies that are startups today will be major employers down the road, continuing to develop and export Canadian innovation. Domestically manufactured components and materials will be used to build Canada's infrastructure and sold into markets around the world. I think the export opportunity part of this is really critical. And our traditional industries like cement, mining, manufacturing, transportation will be more productive, more competitive, and creating more value because they've embraced the modern technologies that are defining the next generation of economic growth.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It was a real pleasure to chat with you today.
Oh, you're welcome, Adam. Nice to chat with you too. Thank you.
Thank you to our audience for listening. And don't forget to subscribe and follow our podcast on your favorite platform. We hope to see you next time.